right, everybody. How you guys doing?
Doing great.
Good, Ben.
All right, so we've got 7 panelists, and about 28% of them you've seen speak already today. So for those who haven't yet presented, I think when I pitch a question over to you as part of the panel, if you wouldn't mind just giving a little brief bio about yourself so that the audience knows who you are, what your expertise is, and I think that would probably be the most expeditious way to handle it. Make sense?
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
All right. So in looking at what we intended to cover for the panel discussion, the title on the agenda was Attaining Precision in Medical Device Development by Adopting Innovative Technologies. And that could go almost any direction. That could go thousands of different paths, I think. But I would want to start first and foremost to eliminate any kind of complexity and just really jump right into the types of innovations and technology that we've seen today. So obviously the role of AI, ML, and DL, 3D printing, how these technologies help us. So jumping in there, how best can companies approach innovating using any of these new technologies? And I think, Raj, I would direct that question to you first. And please, again, start it off for the benefit of the attendees by giving a brief background on yourself.
Yeah.
Claude, if you wouldn't mind jumping in on that one, take us into this. So again, provide a little bit of background, but in answering the question, how do these technologies not only help us, but how best can companies approach innovation by using any of these new technologies?
Absolutely. So thank you very much for the invitation. Very quickly, I'm Claude Nugard. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Ergosuture. I worked 20 years in pharma, primarily at Novartis and Merck. And so I have a perspective from a big pharma, big company standpoint, but I'm coming right now from a startup standpoint. And so very much the idea, when you look at these technologies, moving from, what I think Michael presented very well, which is the future of telemedicine, telehealth, telesurgery, which is actually the big question, moving forward, is how do you integrate AI or AR into your current product development? And so one thing that is pretty clear when you work in a big company and you have all the resources in the world, it makes sense to actually consider this element and leverage AI to actually accelerate your development and minimize your expenses. Now, the flip side, when you work as a startup, you have to rely on third parties. And I think that will be a discussion that would be interesting to have, doing group, is that these technologies have not cascaded down to the third-party level, which is how can you integrate these technologies at the cost-efficient level that will allow you actually to bring the simulation development process and enable you to have some cost benefits. At the same time, you can increase the number of iterations and feedback you get with the customer. And so that's very much the key question right now is how can you democratize AR and AI to move in the next generation, knowing that most of the development comes from startups. We need to actually figure out that question. So that's something I would get back to group because they might have a better understanding on how do we move there.
Yeah, good question. So drawing on that from what Claude's just mentioned, maybe over to you. I wanted to kind of jump back into what you had mentioned about 5G in surgical suites and other applications, but let's continue this discussion from where Claude left it off as far as bringing innovative approaches into the life cycle.
Is that my question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I think, well, you have to get the cadre of experts, and there's many here to help you do the integration. And there are some models, and so I think we just go off of the models, right? A lot of the AI in ophthalmology right now is just examining images and try to see where there's areas of pathology, right? And so we're trying to move from that into where the AI is actually working for the surgeon in other ways besides just identifying pathology. So I think those are kind of models that are there. We're following some of the models, some of the needs of the surgeons that AI can address. For instance, the to check the tool setting. The AI and another application can automatically register what tools you used and make sure all of them are retracted before you suture up a patient. And so I think going with the easy models, it's kind of like you do what you get paid for, right? Well, now in AI, you're going to do what helps the surgeon the most first, and then branch out into more big data, more analytics, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Hey
How
Ben,
about,
can I add a few things?
Please do, yes.
Hi, I'm Raj Nihalani. I'm CTO of ReShape Lifesciences, but I've been working in the AI space for a few years now. And I started my company during the last recession and then successfully sold it in 2017. My focus is purely health tech from an innovation perspective. And where what Michael just mentioned is the AI is playing a very big role from a value-based treatment perspective as well. So as you look at larger strategics, they are wanting to make sure that they are delivering the care that their tools and equipment are promising to do. And now by adding that extra layer of artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence with machine learning tools, I think it's adding more value. And I'll give you one example, just like we talked about, Michael mentioned about surgery. If you look at where oncology is going, and before, it used to take a long time to take for a surgeon to decide now whether this portion of the gut has a tumor or a metastatic lesion. Now with the aid of these artificial intelligence tools, with imaging, with the right algorithms, the prediction of this opportunity is better, because now he can act immediately or almost immediately. Before he had to take a sample, send it to the lab, it would take 10 days and the patient would be rolled in for a second surgery. That's very traumatic. So I think we are kind of adding value slowly but surely, and we're getting there. And in this situation, you might need a lot of vendors to help you out. So it's not going to be a one shop answering all. I think it's an opportunity of integration of several technologies together or several vendors together to kind of make it work for you.
Yeah, Ben, I can give you a real world example, taking right from that. So with our headset, we have a lot of computing power, but we don't have all the computing power to do everything. But with the 5G network, we can actually take those pre-op MRIs, identify where the cancerous areas are, and then when the surgeon opens up the patient, everything will be color coded, and the cancer as it was, because we can, with AI, we can rotate the images, do whatever to make them look like what's inside, and then color coded, you can see that area that was identified pre-op. And that's possible because we have to ping the algorithms out to the localized 5G network, get the answer back to be able to colorize and identify that.
So Ben, just to piggyback on that and just to close that part, I think I agree with everybody that what Michael and Raj just mentioned. If you think about the fact that we are basically needing 145 million surgery per year to meet the global burden of disease. What you presented, Michael, is fantastic. You can actually estimate that in countries like Asia, Africa, where you don't have the same skill set, you can overlay a surgeon on top of another surgeon to actually help him to actually refine his diagnostics and the time of reaction. That's very much where we're going. And that's where, I think we all agree on that. Now, the next question is, knowing that big companies are not the only one developing, is how do you get a startup like mine to integrate AI into the development process? And that's basically where the other part of the equation I would like, really to get some feedback, because that's very much where I think we will democratize and open the floodgates to development. And how do you get that? Because there is a lot of ideas out there that could be fantastic, from simulation in silico studies, and we'll talk about that later, that we should leverage. The question is, the price point for startup is not there.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I think maybe taking that price point and looking a little bit at the situation from the perspective of devil's advocate, Vito, I'd like to go to you for the next question. And thinking about problems that arise when we look at customers and markets and we don't reflect on the investors, and therefore we create problems for ourselves within some of these smaller organizations, as Claude mentioned.
So I think that there are two ways to look at this question. Is do you develop a product for an investor, or do you actually basically leverage your ecosystem to find a solution that investor will echo with? I think that many companies tend to basically cater for investors, and the problem is most of the time investors are not familiar versed into the market they want to get in. And so the key question, and that's our position at Ergosuture, is very much, emerging ourselves into the ecosystem, and what we presented to you is how we can actually every step of the way bring the customer to the point that they become basically complete, part of the development process.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that is something that we don't do enough in many companies. One of the the chances that we have is that in our case, our chief scientific officer is not a user himself, so we couldn't rely on the inventor to define the product because he's not a user, and that's something that can be very perverted for companies who sometimes use an insider or user to develop a product, and he becomes a unit of one to assess if the product is the right thing. And I think that's where you're leading to, which is sometimes you might mislead the investor or mislead the product because you actually submerged by your own idea and you don't basically interact too much with exterior. And so the key question is, how do you create this network? And what we have done in our case is multiply the point of interaction or of a long development process to make sure that we gave access to the users. So the feedback, for example, we got from our users, from our surgeons, is that most companies don't, they listen to them, but don't include their feedback. And so many of them were surprised that every single iteration, every comment came back as an action item for us. And that's something that is key if you want to actually make sure that you are basically, pinpointing the problem and communicating properly. Is showing basically your counterpart that their input is valuable and you integrate that into your process.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Let's take this to the regulatory approval route. Alan, I'd like to get your feedback on this. And there are a lot of companies, and it begins obviously with startups, but even mid-sized companies and larger in some cases, and they don't know always how to best commercialize their product or get certain ideas presented to and through the approval processes. And I want to focus on this idea that commercialization is not perfection. So give us your thoughts on the regulatory pathway and what organizations should be thinking about as far as getting some of these life cycle critical issues that come up in development through the FDA most efficiently.
Thank you very much. A little bit of my background, about 49 years of dealing with FDA. I was formerly with the FDA, been consulting for 42 years, and we've gotten over 3,500 products through the FDA review process. Recently, well, all along in the years we've been in business, we always worked with startups. And of course, lately the startups have been really hot with all the new technology that involves software coming out of the top universities and research centers. It's one of the hottest areas. The problem with a lot of the startups is that they look for perfection, and they have in their mind what they think their device or their technology is going to be able to do. We've been talking about detecting cancer. We're talking about finding, able to look at certain type of conditions. The last speaker, Michael, brought about his glasses for helping out kids with lazy eye and then monitoring that. And all that is a technology that is amazing technology. We've worked with other companies with similar devices over the years. The problem is, besides the fact that the software has to work and has to be validated and tested, you got to come to an end point where you're going to be able to commercialize it. It's fun to be able to raise money, millions of dollars, with the concept of what you're going to do. But without being able to launch that product and make money, you're going to run out of money at a certain time. And you got to keep your investors understanding what you're doing, how you're going to do it, and different target points. You got to be realistic on trying to launch the product in a way that makes sense with an indication for use that would be good for your technology, good for the medical community, good for the doctors. And then after that, add on to it if you got something better, especially with AI. AI is always learning, and you start to see, wow, we could do this with this device. We could do this with this device. But if you're going to try to put all that into one application, you're going to burn yourself out before you're going to ever be in business. And, you know, being in our country, the idea is to get it on the market, start marketing it, make money on it, then come back and go with the FDA with new indications for use. The good thing is that once you work with the FDA, once you get one thing through the FDA, the reviewers that you work with are interested to see what else you have, and they already know where you are, and it's easy to move the next items through the FDA. So without having a plan of launching your first product in a realistic time frame and looking for that perfection could actually be a death note for a lot of companies, and we've seen that happen also.
And I want to, this is Vito. Hello, I wanted to add to what Alan is saying. I've started over 10 companies, and I'm also invested in a number of companies. And the problem that I've seen, and investing directly or through funds into companies in the biomedical area, is what everyone is saying today is that the integration of technology yields new products. So you have a lot of more products with a lot more regulations, a lot of more rules, and leads to complexity, and also leads to longer development times. And when you have longer development times, you have to also account for the investors that you contact, and you cannot make the mistake, which I've seen many times and I see over and over, of people being happy because they raise money, but they don't realize that they have to return that money in a timely manner. And unless you structure your investments and you identify your investors in a way, and you communicate properly with investors, that your timelines are long, and long is important, like long years, many years before an exit, then you create disappointments with your investors, and therefore you create problems with yourself and your companies. So as Alan was saying, you can have, you can raise money, it's quite easily, but when it's delivering it through a regulatory pathway, through a commercial expectation, that takes time, patience, and it's not always investors are patient. So be careful. That's my gem maybe is, because I've been through this in good and bad times, of aligning yourself with that share your same timeline, and also terms with investment terms that don't create misalignments of interest in terms of short and long time.
Yeah, thank you, Vito. That was really good. I agree with you 100%. A lot of times we'll go in meeting with companies for the first time, and then all of a sudden they have 25 different indications for use, and we go, whoa, 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 let's slow down. Let's determine the first one we could get to market that we could commercialize, and then move from one to the other. And sometimes you're dealing with this guy, no, we don't want to do that. We want to get the first one out. We want to be the first one. We want to be the best one on the market. We want to have everything. I said, that's not the way it's going to work. You don't understand how long it's going to take. You don't understand how much time and effort it's going to be, and you don't understand the money that you're going to be pouring in for maybe a claim that you wish you had a year before. So you got to be careful when you're coming up with new devices, new technologies, and when to launch them and when to get them out on the market. And I think that's what Vito was trying to say as well.
And so, Ben, just to illustrate that, and I agree with both of you, we took a long time for development, and you mentioned that this morning. And the main reason is that we took a while to understand which investor we should cater to. And so Luis mentioned to you that surgeons are investing. 70% of investors today are surgeons or doctors. And the reason for that is it took us a while and hardship to realize that they were the only one who understood where we were going. Okay, the normal investor was not understanding that, that change. So why are you needing a driver? Why are you going to do that when everybody has done it? The only person who could, resonate with us and echo what we're doing was the one who had the pain point. And so I fully agree with Vito, and which is you need to figure out very much, how to pick your investors along the continuum, because it might take longer than you need. It might basically require different, turn points or bifurcation, and you need to make sure that you are basically in sync with them.
Claude, I could tell you right now, every startup that I work with did not estimate the time to launch this product right. Normally, if they say 6 months, you're looking 1.5 years or 2 years. They really don't have any idea of how long it's going to take to get it ready to get to the FDA. And then they don't put in how long it's going to take the FDA to review it.
You're right.
I agree.
Yeah, can I expand on that bit? So I think this has been a good topic so far, and actually just trying to bring a development angle into it as well. So Joe Gordon,
yeah,
innovation at Ximedica. Ximedica's a full-service product development firm with an exclusive focus on medical capabilities to do design through manufacture and have all the disciplines from research, design, engineering, regulatory, and manufacturing as well. I'm enjoying the conversation, and there's a common theme here, and building on the theme of the conference in terms of precision. And I think, Ellen, you're alluding to this, is that one of the biggest missteps you can make in the development process is not actually giving clear definition of what the actual launch product would be, establishing that minimum viable product, considering the user needs, considering the business needs, considering the technology maturity and availability, and then obviously, as you were just alluding to, some of the regulatory considerations, especially as you start to get into some of the more unknown or cutting edge technologies and charting new territory like AI and the algorithm development area can do. So I think it's critical in these early steps of these development activities to actually map that minimum viable product out and be very diligent with that clean definition, and then staying diligent to make sure that your development timeline is based on that and that you're not allowing the feature creep. And it doesn't mean that you can't do the generational planning and still capture those more aspirational targets and collect those along the way, especially when you're doing your research and you're getting good insights. But there has to be a prioritization or you'll never get up to launch.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in fact, Joe, I was going to go to you for the ecosystem part. So you had mentioned yesterday when we chatted about this panel discussion, the innovation of product ecosystems, and maybe let the audience know what aspects of that in your mind they should be cognizant of.
Sure. So linked to the activity I was just describing, when you're trying to map out the product and what it should be, it's critical that you are thinking from a holistic standpoint. And so many products, especially the ones being cited today, include aspects like data and digital and software development and AI. And if you're not actually giving consideration to what that could be, what that needs to be in the future, then chances are you're not going to develop that right program. So it's really critical that you're considering really from the end to end, everything from storage in the facility to who owns the data to confidentiality and HIPAA considerations that are in there, cybersecurity. So that real holistic and ecosystem consideration was really the thought there yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Good. So now I want to. Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say, who owns the data is different in the U.S. than it is in Europe, right? So we have two different ecosystems there.
Yeah, good point. And obviously different regulatory considerations, whether you're in the U.S. or worldwide as well.
All right. I'm going to use that then to change gears, because I was thinking about a different path, but let's talk about that, the regulatory aspects. So Payman, I want to go to you and talk about digital evidence and by which methods do we have good digital evidence? And so maybe start and explain a digital twin concept and digital patient.
Sure, I try to do my best. Name is, let's see if I can connect to my mouse. Payman Afshari. I worked with DePuy Synthes for the past 15 years, Johnson & Johnson. Most of my expertise been model development, typically, but generally physics-based model development. And since 2012, I've been involved with the regulatory on paving the pathway for accepting modeling simulation results as evidence for submission, for regulatory submission. And it's an evolving field, of course. The language is changing from modeling simulation to in silico. There's a lot of terms that are almost equivalently used across the globe. So and in silico technologies generally, which covers AI to machine learning, deep learning, so any type of model. So and the point is, how do we evaluate these models? So as they walk to, so you do this in product development, you see that life cycle, and you could use that evidence that you're generating for making decisions. You make evidence to make decisions, right? So internally, you could use with your own risk of using these models to you go, you take A route or B route. But on the regulatory sense, that's when you have to have a third party, which is the US or the FDA, to accept your evidence. And that's been lacking for a long time. What is the standard? Or what do we use? How do we know a model is credible or good enough? And since 2012, FDA has been leaning on improving or advancing regulatory sciences and on using modeling and simulation. And that's been like one of the top 5 priorities every year. They list that as a top priority. And we've been working with them on through different organizations to promote developing standards. So a lot of our work has been developing standards, promoting it within the regulatory world with the IMDRF, working on harmonization with Europe. So there's developing there's a good clinical practice, is it a good simulation practice? So there's a lot of development that if you think about a totality at some point when we have all these different models. So what do you use models to predict stuff, right? And you can make chain, you can create a chain that chain would be your digital evidence or digital twin. I'm sorry, that would be a digital twin. And the advantage of that for the regulatory is that they can audit your digital much faster than the paper trail of hundreds of pages and a couple of piles of papers, and they always complain about that. And you're easier to be audited as well. So that is what I've been doing for the past few years.
Yeah, good. And to build on that point, if you wouldn't mind, Payman. So you had mentioned when we were chatting yesterday about the panel that data, big data, and AI are attached at the hip, and you've got this issue with big data. You've got registries, huge amounts of extant information, and so I guess the question then becomes, how good are the big data that we all are in different ways endeavoring to use?
Sure, and there's that question of real-world evidence and real-world data. So the two are attached in the hip, right? So the data could come from the registries and various type of registries, and then the point about ownership, who owns them, monetization, anonymization. And a lot of times, if we had a lot of proposals to do, hey, we have access to data, but anonymization cost is so high that the project will never take up. So there is and it's the same complaint in academics in Europe when they want to access their data because privacy rules trumps everything, right? So and how do you make sure that the patient privacy is sacrosanct, and then at the same time you have access to that data to be able to improve health. So and the European Commission has identified AI in healthcare as one of the top and one of the big technological advancement that can be made for healthcare. So yes, the AI data is attached to the hip because the models are based off of data, but which brings the other question of data quality, and and then once you have all these things, is that can you trust the AI to make the right prediction?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. So I want thinking then about how we would use data, and in the very brief portion of my talk today, when I mentioned GDPR and how algorithmic opacity is a problem, it makes me then kind of jump between United States, EU, and rest of world regulatory legislations and requirements. So maybe Raj, over to you. With MDR and 13485 from FDA and different data ship, can we ever get to a place where we have a globally harmonized approach in product development and preparation for market launch? Or will we always have...
Because I think the entire group here is very much aware that this harmonization effort has been going on for several decades.
Right.
On the med device side and stuff. And so I think with all the pieces that that Payman mentioned about, with big data sets and the information that is available to us is, first of all, the quality of it. the randomness at which it's being collected. And then, and of course, with the GDPR, which is much more stricter in its origin, and just simple things that we are collecting today. It's so tough to harmonize the cultures. There's a difference in cultural activity and the activities that are happening, and so there's no trust anymore in terms of what is being coming in and how to. So I think harmonization is a far-fetched thing. I think it will take a long time, and people silos. But I think at some point, maybe over 4 or 5 years, it might get better. One thing has happened is COVID has made a little bit more harmony in a way. People are starting to collect information more harmoniously. And I think with this virtual telehealth and stuff, I think people are creating a little bit more uniform data collection efforts, let's put it that way. So there is not so much randomness. And so I think the less random things are, it's more easy to harmonize. So I think that's what I can predict, or that's where I think it can be. But from a regulatory, from an organization perspective, I think it will be a tough. I think MDR has been postponed. Alan, perhaps it's been postponed by another year. And so that puts a lot of companies into a different predicament. The cost of holding on to a clinical trial in Europe, is it worth is the juice worth the squeeze, or should we just move to United States and do stuff in United States? So I think that is a big deal. It's all interrelated. And then when you talk about funding, Claude mentioned that, hey, I'm using surgeons to understand my technology and they're funding my technology. But then there are other hassles associated with it. You are diluting your cap table, you're increasing your cap table. Venture capitalists are going to be nervous to have such a large cap table on their books. So future funding becomes problem. You got small money now, but what about millions that you need in the future, correct? So I think it's so interconnected. If you're not a European player, then European VCs don't want to play with you. If you are not a US player and you're only European player, then US investors don't. So I think money is tied to our activity, regulatory work. So I think it's all a very complex play. It's not as easy to say here, this is going to get harmonized. But I think I'm making my best effort to kind of answer that question.
No, I think you did a great.
I think he did a great job. I mean, my concern is that, well, now with the new MDR, and again, that's supposed to start, I think, in April of 2021. They extended it a year because of the COVID. And they really don't have anybody doing inspections now under the new 13485 and all. It's a mess. We have clients begging to get audited so they could make sales and get things out. It's been really tough to get their CE mark. This thing has caused a real problem besides the disease. My feeling is that the way the Europeans were selling the CE mark and the way the FDA was regulating, it would never come to that pass. I've seen lately, though, the FDA is starting to do their audits like ISO auditors, and it has really upset me because ISO audits are nothing like what FDA audits used to be like. And if the FDA keeps going that way, ultimately there's going to be a catastrophe, which always causes the FDA to go back, because the pendulum, the regulatory pendulum, swings back and forth and back and forth. It never stops in the middle. And right now, even with the way things are, right now what the EUA has thrown the whole medical community and the whole FDA into turmoil. This is the worst thing that the FDA could have possibly seen, because they lost complete control over all these PPE and a lot of other medical devices to try to get them to market. And they're coming out with notices on hand sanitizers and all the problems with that. And then they've taken people off a list for their masks not meeting and specifications. And we could see that the FDA is getting tighter and tighter on any of the COVID IVD tests. They're making it harder and harder. The FDA is in a nightmare with this EUA. They can't wait for this EUA to end.
Yeah, agreed. May I just add one more piece, to the
Sure.
participants? So when we are talking about technologies, Alan had alluded to the fact that be very careful how you're pitching to the FDA. My goal, I've built a bunch of technologies through my career, and I would recommend FDA is all about claims. So if you claim something, then you got to prove it. If you say, I'm going to accomplish a blood glucose of this much, then they want you to prove it. And so that makes the trial tougher. So when you're dealing with AI, digital stuff, try to claim what is realistic, what you can accomplish. If you can accomplish, FDA has no issues. So that's where people, like somebody was talking about perfection, correct? Don't worry about perfection. Talk about what you can accomplish and you'll get there. And if you keep a small goal, you can always increase your goals, correct? So if you start with a smaller, achievable goal, FDA, that's a claim. So it's a very simple logic. If you are claiming something, they'll ask you to prove how do you make it safe and efficacious to that point. And that's all they're worried about. And in Europe, the regulatory authorities are not playing doctor. In US FDA, to a certain extent, they do play doctor to ask you to get safety and efficacy. But outside United States, they're letting the surgeons and the doctors decide what's good for them. So the regulatory hurdle is a little bit lower, but with the MDR changes, that's tightening up as well. So I think there's a small window to get things moving along. And I won't be so pessimistic about it. I think we need to encourage the entrepreneurs to move in this direction because there's a lot of value to be made.
I agree with you. Absolutely.
Anyone else have any thoughts about that topic?
So Ben, yeah, just, as some kind of closing from my side, AI, I look at it as, the great equalizer or the great divider. And what I mean by that, Michael shared with us the ability to leverage this technology to help, diagnosing, a patient or helping a surgeon, miles away. You could consider that, as we go through telesurgery, as we improve basically this system, we might be able to equalize how health is dispatched, worldwide. But you might not realize that the same issue is happening in the US. If you have basically an appendicitis blowing up and you live in the countryside of Indiana, you don't have much luck because right now all the appendectomies are selective. And so the great thing about AI and AR and the way we are looking at it is very much how to democratize, how to make this platform mobile and readily available at the point of care. So how can you leverage that? Would the point of care be basically the outside of Indianapolis, or would it be in Angola? It doesn't matter. And I think that right now there is, that's a big promise that we are looking at. But it could also become the great divider because as we develop, mega hospitals that have all the technology inside and that require patients to go there, we might be missing the point.
Now, I think having said that, Claude, how I'd like to end this, I had another question to throw out there, but instead I'm going to change gears, being cognizant of everyone's time. I think we have such deep expertise on the panel right now. Whatever you're thinking about that this conversation has catalyzed, anything we're missing with the notion of adopting innovative technologies. So imagine yourself as a participant in this, and I'll just kind of go to each one of you. What would you like to hear yourself say as a parting piece of wisdom? And then each of you would have a couple minutes. So Alan, let me start with you.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, so if you were to imagine that you were viewing this as a participant, what else would you like to hear coming out of this as far as adopting and using innovative technologies that you think hasn't been covered?
Oh, wow. You guys have done a really, really good job. AI is, I think this doesn't seem to be any limits on it. And I think Michael has presented a great presentation on his technologies and the capability of that. I was able to use some very, very powerful 3D virtual reality goggles, and it scared the living daylights out of me. So, I mean, if we're going to be moving in any sort of getting inside the body, I guess taking cameras and which is already in there, but getting real-time cameras into the body, if not using the wand like they did on Star Trek to go over the body, which we actually are working on a couple of those now. But this technology is mind-blowing, and I always tell people, if you could live long enough, the technology is going to keep you alive even longer.
And I can take a stab at it as well, too. And
Please.
And Michael, I appreciated your presentation as well, too. That was cutting edge and sci-fi-like. I'll stick on my theme, though, in terms of, especially with the topic being precision. I'm going to link that to planning. So while I did describe that determining the minimum viable product is critical, and that clean definition and being kind of targeted is important, I think it's also really important to consider the future generations and make sure that you are putting the right hook points into your product. So as you consider the different technologies that you're targeting, the claims that you're making, you should be able to know what the next ones are. Because sometimes the initial development, maybe you should put a more sophisticated sensor in there. Maybe you should put some sensors in that are collecting data that are just collecting data to inform future embodiments and future adaptations of the software. So I think another critical aspect of the planning is predicting what you're going to want your product to do in the future so that that future development becomes a lot more efficient.
Let me just throw in one thing, like Joe said. There is a lot of software and technology out there which you could turn a switch on and off. You could develop a very, very extensive piece of equipment, but your indications for use, you want to keep it simple. If you could just switch off a lot of the other aspects and then go back to that later on and get approval just for that one aspect, and then you move ahead. We've seen that, and we've done that with many of our clients.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would like to add, this is Vito, maybe to add to both Joe and Alan's, Joe Highland and Mike's points, is not only look at technology, but look at what the end users, as Joe was saying, would like, and go and spend time with them. Don't make up stuff, just spend time, validate your assumptions, talk to as many people as possible. Don't be shy, no one's going to copy what you do. Talk to investors. They have exposure as well. Talk to potential customers, to market, suppliers, regulators. Talk to as many people as possible. The more you talk, the less risky is your application, and then you can build a specification, which can be larger or smaller, and then build a roadmap towards developing what your initial idea, or maybe the initial idea would be, but start with big, but inform steps.
Vito, I agree with you, except if you don't know how to talk to the FDA, I would be very careful of going to the FDA too early on and getting them involved, because it could only cause problems. Being a former FDAer, FDA is not your partner, they're not your consultant. Yeah. And it could take you down a road that you might not want to go to. And because if you throw things out and you agree in a meeting, you could get stuck with that. So you got to be careful when dealing with that.
Great point, great point. So maybe rather than regulatory bodies, regulatory consultants.
Right.
Who can be flexible. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Good point.
I say, I've been very much enriched by what's happening in this panel, but I would say something about what Vito said. It would resonate with me as an end user. AI, AR, and all these beautiful technologies are great, but the way that you shape these technologies to be very clinically relevant is by context. So, and that context usually is end user dependent. You have an end user that has an experience, and that experience relates to pain points, relates to something that needs to be improved upon, something that needs to be reviewed, integrated with other technologies to make something way more powerful. And that generates a context to which you can basically attract all these powerful computer power to generate a very, very, very versatile solution that can lead the end user to generate solutions for the problem, whatever the problem may be. Might be an integration between software and hardware, might be just a diagnostic tool, or whatever that might be. But that's still very much a human endeavor to see from your experience what is it that you can optimize and use AI, AR to get that and to get there faster.
Great,
Yeah, I would echo that and just say that I always tell people that AI is just a tool, and it can't be used independently. It has to be used with the object outcome and also the other tools that we have, like communication and the device that creates it. And so it's not a panacea. I see some of the articles, it looks like AI is going to take over everything, but really it's just a tool, and it has to be addressed to a very focused use.
Yeah, right.
My statement very quickly is a mix of all folks, you know, Vito and Louis and Alan, Joe. I think our listener today is perhaps a startup, perhaps a company that has a med device, and they're looking at and saying, hey, AI, machine learning, well, I don't have any of those tools. Am I screwed? Correct? So no, you're not, because just like Louis mentioned just now, perhaps you can tag it within wearable. Perhaps the end user you can collect data that can optimize your med device, something that can be an add-on tool that can then create a next generation opportunity for you. So my message to the participants is, none of you are in jeopardy if you're not using an AI right now. I think you can build certain tools that can collaborate with yours. And then second thing is, there's plenty of capital now available. You don't just use the word AI to assume that VCs are going to jump and ogle over you because you had an AI terminology in your business plan. I think you need to strategically place that properly so that it doesn't sound like just an AI word that you've thrown in. You need to kind of plan it and go through the process of listening to your user, just like what Vito mentioned. Talk to as many players that are involved, even venture capitalists who might say, well, I have a focus on artificial intelligence and machine learning, but I'm not thinking in that direction. I'm thinking of a different direction. So perhaps that's also an opportunity for you to play. And then if one VC has the same mindset, there may be a herd mentality that's going around. So you might as well align yourself to that mindset and get to where you need to be. I think it's very important to play these cross-functional folks to get capital. If you don't have capital, it won't make sense. You may have the best technology.
The other thing I just want to throw in, and that was a very good point, is that most of the startups have no idea how much it's going to cost to get something through. Now, many times they overestimate how much it's going to cost. They don't know because they don't understand FDA. They don't understand what the FDA is looking for to prove the intended use of the product, that you could actually get through FDA with a lot less testing at times. So you really want somebody who's going to be able to explain the process in order to get it through the FDA in a very coordinated effort.
I have to, I 100% agree with what Alan's saying. One of the things that I started just got breakthrough device from the FDA, and it didn't accept all European data on it. So it didn't, anything we had about also didn't cost us much. I mean, something, but not much. So totally agree with that. And the FDA can be adversary, but can also be, if you're solving a problem, they will jump on it.
Yeah, I'd echo that, Ben, and everybody, that right now, at least, you can use partial samples from the U.S. and partial from Europe to get the CE mark. So that's, at least that's where we are now.
That's right. That's a great point. Is Payman still here, or did he drop off?
He sent a chat note that said he had to drop off.
Okay.
So Ben, to give you my conclusion,
yes,
just
please.
to summarize, we presented to you guys this morning a hardware, and so a simple in the driver, and would say, what's the point with AI? The working assumption behind that hardware was, how can we make an average surgeon good and a good surgeon great and at the same time cut suturing time and surgical time by 20 to 50%. That's a promise of AI for us. The way we look at this is, how can we move actually competencies from a device or a specialist to someone that is less competent but that can effectuate, do the same task? And that's very much where, we need to consider is when, do you need a surgeon to go down, to an emergency room to actually close a wound? You need to have the actual specialist in the operating room when you can use general surgeon to do that and connect this guy with a specialist. That's very much, the working assumption behind what we are doing, and that's basically why we are very much interested in the discussion.
Agreed. Great points. And thank you very much, panelists. That was fantastic. And I learned more than I could have possibly imagined I'd learn in the last hour. Somebody I didn't hear from yet is Sam. Sam, give us your parting thoughts.
I agree with all of you on board. But I do want to take some time to thank every single one of you for participating. Most importantly, you, Ben, for staying with us all day today. You've been working closely with Sherry, with Victor, Luke, and Noah, and the rest of my team. So I do want to thank you. It would have been better if we could all meet up in person, but hopefully once this pandemic passes and once there's a vaccine in the market, we do plan to organize an in-person meeting. But I do want to thank you, Ben, all of our panelists, all of our attendees that stayed throughout the day. If you want to all connect with each other, do please use our meeting scheduler link. For those that have meetings next week, it is a good way to build valuable connections for the future. If you haven't already, follow us on social media, follow our web pages for our future upcoming events. And yeah, with that said, I do want to thank you all once again for participating.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Really fantastic talks today and good input.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye now.